Welcome all. Today I'd like to talk about a few things that cover both my rig and the gimbal, and a few other sort of observations that I've made during the last couple of weeks of use and so on, which may be of interest to those who have been following my little travails. The first thing I'd just like to cover is that I've watched a number of videos on people who have got the Crane 3S and other gimbals and so forth, and one of the things that strikes me is that there are quite a lot of users who describe their camera weights and so forth in way too scientific a terminology. Very common usage is when they say that this is my camera. They call it a very heavy camera or heavy camera, and for a simpleton like me, that's a little bit too obscure to understand. I prefer to sort of operate in grams and kilograms. To me, that's a little bit easier to understand, and one of the points that somebody commented once on one of my videos was to add a scale to the video itself to show the weight. So I thought I'd do that because I've explained that this rig of mine weighs 4.1 kilos, and what better way to do it than to actually demonstrate it on a scale. That should now be sitting on 4.1 kilos, and that's fully rigged out in the way that I generally use it, apart from the fact that I don't have a handle on it at the moment, which I usually attach when I'm doing it handheld on its own. The other thing is the gimbal itself. Now, this is no longer anywhere near the weights specified by Zhiyun. With the motor and a few other bits and bobs on there, it now weighs 4.2 kilos, so it's actually heavier than the camera itself. However, overall, the combination that I've got, I'm getting used to it, and it's not that bad. A lot of people would probably balk at the weight combination there, but it's something that I'm sort of starting to handle, and it depends on how long you use it. I'm good for half an hour at least at the moment, and I've got other sort of issues that, or setups that laid me in making it a little bit easier. Like I said, the handle that I put on there is very, very good, so I'll get this out of the way for the moment. The other thing I like to talk about is something that a couple of people have asked me about on various YouTube threads, is what lens I'm using on here. They haven't heard of the 14 to 35 f2 that I've sometimes commented on, and if anybody's interested, this is the original Olympus Zuiko Digital 14 to 35 f2 supersonic wave drive wave drive lens. It came out in February 2005, and I think I got this copy about late 2005 or early 2006, and it's been my sort of go-to general purpose lens when I was doing news and sports type photography for a newspaper, and it's just superb. Olympus spared no money when they made this particular lens, or any effort either. It was one of the best lenses that they've ever made. It has no aberrations or nothing to worth worrying about. The quality of optics and everything else are just absolutely superb, because they were made in those days for a camera that was had no corrections and so forth as far as the software goes and all the rest. Its bigger sister or bigger brother was the 35 to 100 f2, which I also had. Unfortunately, I managed to drop that and wreck it, and it couldn't be repaired, and could not find a replacement copy anywhere. So I bought a later day micro 4/3 zoom lens to compensate. But this is my go-to lens. It has really served me well over many, many years, and I just keep coming back to it. I've tried other lenses on it, and I don't think anything sort of competes. It's as good as any cine zoom or prime lens and so forth that you can virtually get. The depth of field is very, very good for the type of lens it is, and I'm not one of those who goes for the super shallow depth of field where you can just get one eyeball in focus and the rest of a person's face is completely out of focus. That's not my sort of thing, so I don't need an f1.2 or equivalent lenses and things like that. In full frame terms, this is a 28 to 70 angle of view lens, so it's a pretty common one that's available in normal camera lenses and so forth. One of the reasons why I use a zoom lens is that all in my past work that I used to do, I used to work in all sorts of obscure environments, rain, dust, you name it, and with digital cameras, the less lens changes you have, the less chance you're going to have getting crud and stuff onto your sensor, which means that less chance of ruining your image. So I've always been a firm believer in zoom lenses. Get high quality zoom lenses and they work well. I'm not necessarily a disser of primes, but a lot of the talk about use only primes to get cinematic results and so forth I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think there's much more to it than just a particular lens, but I picked this because of its practicality and the quality that it provides. I think this is equal to any prime lens at any focal length that you want to select, and so I'm not, in my view, losing anything by using a particular zoom. So these are now very hard to get, and if you can get a good quality one, they are still quite pricey compared to modern lenses, so that sort of reflects the value of this particular lens itself. Now, one of the things that I've sort of come to notice with the gimbal, good and bad things, or not bad things, but some things that I think could be improved, or there are certainly issues about it that I think would make the gimbal usage itself a lot better, and I sort of really do enjoy using the gimbal. It just offers so many different features, and if I can get this back in now, it's balancing, not quite. There we go. So that's as easy as pie to balance the gimbal once I've got it set up. I don't change anything after I've got the system in place, and I think it's now operating. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed is that I've been doing some panning and so forth in some of the shots, and that's using the joystick down here, and you just can't emulate that smoothness of panning with a fluid head. I can't say that you can't do it with any fluid head. There are obviously those used in filmmaking and so forth that probably cost more than this whole setup together just for the head, and they probably have very, very smooth operation. But when it comes to doing some panning and tilting and so forth, this is just superb. The issue that I do have with it though is that it's very, very hard to control the pan and tilt speed. You've just got to hold it, and you can go very fast, or you can just do it really slowly. And I would wish that there was a way of doing a control setup in here so that you could set the actual movement, whether it's panning or tilting, to be the slow, medium, fast, or something like that. Even if it's just done through an app, the Zhiyun Play app, that would be good, because at the moment it just doesn't give you quite that control that I'd like to have, and I think probably others would too as well. So there really does need to be something done with that, because it's a good feature, but it's not being able to be utilised properly. The other thing that I really sort of feel that it needs is a remote control, a proper type of remote control system. Whether it's through the actual app itself, or could it be implemented into the handle, or a separate handle there. Zhiyun has been making some handles for this, sort of the wireless ones that I've mentioned before, but there's nothing for the Crane 3S. And if I put this on a tripod or whatever, or just on the table like this and want to control it remotely, I can't have that ability. I can do it through the app, but the app is very clunky. It's just got a very limited amount of control available to it. Chalk and cheese compared to, say, the Zep-On slider, where you can actually set points and speeds and all that sort of stuff, which is absolutely marvellous. If you could do that with this, oh, it'll be so good. And again, as I point out, assigning buttons, there's all these buttons on the handle and also on the main part of itself that are designed to operate stills cameras, changing ISO, changing aperture and so forth. Yes, they are things that you might want to do with video as well, but in the main, you're not going to do those on the run. You're going to set your camera up, and that's what it's going to be for that particular shoot. And if you want to control your iris and whatever, most stills cameras for video, the iris changing while on the move is pretty crappy. They're not smooth enough anyway. And if you want to control your exposure, well, you use that with ND filters, and it's again planning in advance. So I think remapping, or the ability to remap these buttons to other functions would be so good. The little dial that's down here, that's only really used for doing the menu, whereas technically I think you could use it to control some aspects of the movements as well, but I don't know. There's features that I'll just, oops, grab my, this is the AK 2000, and one of the things that is really handy on such a cheap gimbal as this is, versus this one, which is much pricier, is you can do something like this. I can just go there, hang on, let's get this first. Pick a point, pick another point, and the camera will now start panning and doing that. You can go pan, tilt, any other sort of things. You can adjust the timing for it, how quickly it does it, up to something like 12 hours or whatever it is. So it can be used for a lot of features. And I'm sort of thinking that you can do that on a very inexpensive gimbal like this, yet there's no function available for this, even through an app. If it had an app that allowed you to do it, it would be fantastic, because you may not use it a lot, but if you want to do some really smooth panning movements and so forth, or tilting, or a combination of both, that sort of feature would really make it easy to get that perfect sort of movement for anybody, not just a skilled operator of a pan tilt head, for example. So there's things in there that the app is very, very basic when it comes to stuff like that. When you consider how sophisticated this gimbal is and what you could do with it and what you really can do with it. Now, the other sort of interesting thing I've noticed is that with the Crane 2S now, there's a Pro Pack available, and Zhiyun has come up with now a new motor. And I mentioned that in one of my earlier videos, that the motors on this for the zoom and focus appear to be a bit of an old technology, and I think I was right when I mentioned that, because the new motors are quite different. They have a bigger gear wheel. They actually have a sliding switch, so you can switch it from becoming a focus motor to a zoom motor, and they tend to be, or appear to be, a lot thinner. I'm not going to go and buy those because I've already got these, so it'd be a bit pointless. But they're sort of features that I think perhaps if their future gimbal comes out with a 3S Mark 1, 2, whatever, they'll probably have those better motors on them. How good they are as far as operation goes, hard to say, but they do feature some of the stuff that I've been speaking about earlier. Now, the only other thing that I'm sort of working on with this gimbal is a carry case for it. Like with the camera, I don't want to disassemble it every time I sort of put it away. So I've got a case that takes that nicely and takes all the bits and pieces, the batteries and so on, beautifully. I've sort of got a 17-inch laptop case that this does fit in when I take the handle and the tripod off. And I'm just now waiting for a NATO rail clamp that I can attach to the side with this handle, so it's easy to put on and off. And with that, I might be able to actually put it into a nice case as is and do a quick assembly, rather than having to do a complete breakdown that a lot of people have to do when they're putting their gimbals away. So if I get that and it works successfully, I'll sort of update that somewhere down the track. But at the moment, they're the main features that I've sort of been picking up slowly with the use of this gimbal. And I think, to round it off, the biggest issue I find is that the app that is with the gimbal, or powers the gimbal and a few other things as well, really could do with some major improvements to offer more versatility about the use of the gimbal itself. And I'd really like to have a handle with a focus control motor and so forth, that you could use that separately from the gimbal itself. Even going to the extent that if Zhiyun could replace this handle with a handle that had a focus control motor on it and zoom control, and not so much the photographic aspects on it, that would be a fantastic addition in there, so that you could actually do the good controlling features that you require for video through that handle itself. And because it's a modular thing where it comes out, I think there could be the possibility of making something like that, that just replaces this handle with a different handle that has other functions in it that are more video focused rather than stills camera focused. So that's just something I thought I'd put out there, and whether it's taken up, who knows. It's just something that if you don't mention it, nothing will ever happen. So at the end of the day, that's all I've got to say at the moment, and I hope to see you again next time around, so I'll just say cheers.